Welcome back, everyone. All names are completely made up and do not reflect in any way the real names of the individuals involved. Now hit the like button like you just remembered you left the stove on at home. You can also think about subscribing to the channel. Only 36% of viewers are actually subscribed. Now grab a drink, lock your doors and windows, hit the lights, and let's get started. I never should have come back to this godforsaken town. That thought pounded through my head with each rotation of my sedan's balding tires as I sped down the lonely stretch of highway cutting through the dense Oregon forest. The towering pines loomed on either side, their branches reaching across the road like gnarled fingers, ready to snatch me up and drag me into the impenetrable darkness beyond. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the steering wheel, willing the piece of junk car to keep moving. I'd bought it for a song from a used car lot on my way out of Portland, and now I was regretting not splurging for something more reliable. But reliable costs money, and money was in short supply these days. The check engine light had been glowing accusingly at me for the last 100 miles. Now an ominous sputtering noise was emanating from under the hood, growing louder with each passing minute. I pressed down harder on the gas pedal, silently pleading with the car to hold out just a little longer. Just get me to Bridgeton, I thought. Just a few more miles. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, all I'd wanted was to get as far away from Bridgeton as possible. Now here I was, racing back like the hounds of hell were nipping at my heels. In a way, they were. The life I'd tried to build for myself in the city had come crashing down spectacularly. Fired from my job, evicted from my apartment, credit cards maxed out. Rock bottom had opened up and swallowed me whole. So now, tail between my legs, I was crawling back to the place I swore I'd never return to. Back to the decrepit trailer I'd grown up in. Back to the judgmental stares of the townspeople who'd known me since I was knee-high. Back to the oppressive weight of small-town life that had nearly crushed me as a teenager. Back to the nightmares that still plagued me all these years later. A shudder ran through me that had nothing to do with the chill seeping in through the car's rusted frame. I pushed the memories away, locking them back in the dark corners of my mind where they belonged. I was so lost in my brooding that I almost missed the sign announcing the Bridgeton city limits. A humorless laugh escaped my lips. City limits, as if this backwater burg of 5,000 souls could be called a city. The dense forest gave way to scattered houses and abandoned storefronts as I entered the outskirts of town. Not much had changed in the decade I'd been gone. Same potholed roads, same peeling paint, same air of decay and desperation. I was so focused on navigating the familiar streets that I didn't notice the sputtering of the engine growing more pronounced until it was too late. The car gave one final wheeze, then went silent. I barely had time to guide it onto the shoulder before it rolled to a stop, refusing to go any further. No, I muttered, twisting the key desperately in the ignition. The engine clicked uselessly in response. The fuel gauge mocked me with its unwavering needle pinned below empty. Shit. I slammed my palm against the steering wheel in frustration. Of course the damn thing would die on me now, when I was so close to my destination. I popped the hood and slid out into the chilly night air, wrapping my arms around myself against the biting cold. Peering into the car's mechanical guts, I knew it was futile. The gas tank was bone dry, just like my options. No cell service, no gas, no one who knew where I was. I was utterly alone. A gust of wind whipped through the trees lining the road, sending dead leaves skittering across the cracked pavement. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as an eerie howl drifted on the breeze. I whirled around, scanning the impenetrable wall of shadowy trees crowding the roadside. The howl came again, closer this time, followed by another, then another. A chorus of chilling cries swelled from the darkness surrounding me. My breath caught in my throat as dozens of glowing amber eyes blinked open between the gnarled trunks, fixing on me with predatory focus. A hulking shape detached from the shadows, prowling onto the asphalt with a menacing growl. It was far too large to be a normal wolf, with powerful haunches and a barrel chest. More beasts slunk out to join it, their wicked curved claws gouging the pavement. Ice flooded my veins as recognition dawned. The nightmares that had haunted me since childhood came rushing back in vivid detail. Werewolves. I'd heard the old tales growing up in these woods, whispered legends of men and women who shed their human skins to become ravenous beasts when the moon grew full. I never imagined they could be real. The pack crept closer, lips curling back from enormous fangs that glinted in the moonlight. Ropes of steaming drool swung from their jaws as they growled, a bone-chilling sound that vibrated in my chest. I stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to put the car between myself and the monsters. With an ear-splitting crash, a werewolf leapt onto the hood in an explosion of crumpling metal. I screamed as its massive head smashed through the windshield in a spray of glass. I lunged into the back seat, scrabbling for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around the cold metal of the tire iron just as putrid breath washed over my face. I swung the iron with all my strength, connecting with the beast's skull with a sickening crunch. It reeled back with a pained yelp, shaking its massive head. I struck it again and again, desperate to keep its snapping jaws at bay. All around the car, the pack bayed and snarled, hurling their bodies against the doors. The metal dented and buckled under their assault. I knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through and ripped me to shreds. The werewolf lunged again, its yellow fangs sinking into my calf. I screamed as white-hot agony ripped through me. I brought the tire iron down on the beast's spine with a stomach-turning crack. It released me with a whimper and slumped to the floor, its legs twitching. Warm blood gushed from the deep punctures, soaking my jeans. The world tilted around me as shock and blood loss took hold. I collapsed back against the seat, the tire iron slipping from my numb fingers as my vision tunneled to black. The last thing I saw was the shattered windshield filling with the glowing eyes and gleaming teeth of the werewolves as they surged into the car, eager to claim their prize. I knew I would be just another missing person, my gnawed bones left to bleach in the forest. The monsters had won, as they always did. No one would hear my screams. The hungry forest would devour all trace of Janice Miller, and the werewolves would melt back into the shadows, their bellies full, waiting for the next unwary soul to wander down that lonely stretch of highway. I jolted awake with a strangled gasp, heart pounding against my ribs. Disoriented, I blinked rapidly as I tried to get my bearings. The familiar dingy walls of my childhood bedroom slowly came into focus. A dream. It had just been a dream. I let out a shaky breath, running trembling hands through my sweat-damp hair. The nightmares were getting worse, more vivid, more real. It had been 3 weeks since I dragged myself back to Bridgeton with my tail between my legs. 3 weeks of fitful sleep plagued by snarling beasts and glowing eyes in the darkness. I'd hoped that being back in my hometown would quell the night terrors that had haunted me since childhood. Instead, they seemed to have intensified. Every night I found myself back on that lonely stretch of road, trapped and helpless as the werewolves closed in. With a weary sigh, I swung my legs over the side of the sagging twin bed. A glance at the cracked face of my alarm clock told me it was just past 3 a.m., the witching hour. I knew from experience that trying to go back to sleep was pointless. Might as well get an early start on another thrilling day of job hunting and dodging the judgmental stares of the locals. I padded out to the cramped kitchen of the single wide trailer, wincing as my bare feet hit the cold linoleum. The ancient coffee maker sputtered and hissed as it brewed a pot of liquid tar that barely passed for coffee. While I waited, I gazed out the small window above the sink. In the pre-dawn gloom, I could just make out the edge of the forest looming beyond the overgrown yard. An involuntary shiver ran through me. Even after all these years, those woods still filled me with an instinctive dread. As a child, I'd been convinced monsters lurked in the shadows between the trees, waiting to snatch up any kid foolish enough to wander too close after dark. Now, as an adult, I knew there were no such things as monsters. The real horrors of the world were far more mundane, and in many ways far more terrifying. Poverty, addiction, abuse, the slow death of hope as life grinds you down day after day. Those were the true monsters that stalked Bridgeton. I'd seen their handiwork firsthand growing up in this god-forsaken town. It was why I'd been so desperate to escape as soon as I turned 18. And yet here I was, right back where I started. Turns out you can't outrun your demons forever. The coffee maker gave a final gurgle, snapping me out of my brooding. I poured myself a mug of the steaming black sludge, grimacing at the bitter taste. What I wouldn't give for a proper latte from my favorite Portland coffee shop. But beggars can't be choosers, and these days I was most definitely a beggar. Mug in hand, I settled onto the threadbare couch in the living room and flipped open my battered laptop. Time to scour the job listings for the umpteenth time, searching for anything that might offer a glimmer of hope. But as I scrolled through page after page of minimum wage retail and fast food positions, that familiar feeling of despair began to creep in. What was I doing here? How had my life come to this? Just a few short months ago, I'd been living the dream in Portland. Good job at a tech startup, cute apartment in a trendy neighborhood, wide circle of friends. I'd finally felt like I was building the life I'd always wanted, leaving my traumatic childhood far behind. Then it all came crashing down in spectacular fashion. The startup went belly up practically overnight, leaving me and dozens of other employees high and dry. With no savings to speak of, I quickly burned through my meager severance trying to keep up with Portland's sky-high rent. Before I knew it, I was drowning in debt with no way to keep my head above water. When the eviction notice came, I had nowhere else to turn. So I'd swallowed my pride and called the one person I swore I'd never ask for help, my mother. To my shock, she'd actually agreed to let me move back in temporarily while I got back on my feet. I'd been bracing for a lecture about my failures and poor life choices. Instead, she'd simply said, "Come on home, Janice. We'll figure it out." Maybe she was just lonely after all these years rattling around the old trailer by herself, or maybe she was hoping for a chance to mend our fractured relationship. Either way, I wasn't in a position to look a gift horse in the mouth. So here I was, 28 years old, and living in my childhood bedroom like some kind of failure to launch cautionary tale. Rock bottom indeed. A notification popped up on my laptop screen, jarring me from my pity party. It was a reminder for a job interview later that morning at Bridgeton's lone grocery store. Not exactly my dream job, but at this point I'd take anything that offered a steady paycheck. With a sigh, I shut the laptop and hauled myself off the couch. Might as well start getting ready. God knows it would take a minor miracle to make myself look presentable. As I shuffled towards the bathroom, my gaze was drawn to the small collection of framed photos on the wall. They were relics from a happier time, before everything went to hell. My eyes lingered on one in particular, a faded Polaroid of my father and me on a camping trip when I was about 7 or 8. We were both grinning widely at the camera, our faces smudged with dirt and marshmallow residue from the s'mores we'd been devouring. It was one of the last happy memories I had of my dad before the drinking took over and destroyed our family. He'd been gone for over 15 years now, his liver finally giving out after decades of abuse, but the damage he'd inflicted lived on. I tore my eyes away from the photo, pushing down the familiar ache of loss and anger. No use dwelling on the past. I had more pressing concerns to deal with. Like figuring out how the hell I was going to convince the manager of Bob's Grocery that I was their ideal candidate for stock clerk, despite being wildly overqualified and probably radiating waves of desperation. After a quick shower, I stood in front of the foggy bathroom mirror and critically assessed my reflection. The face staring back at me looked haggard and drawn, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes. My damp hair hung in limp strands around my face, already starting to frizz in the humid air. "You can do this," I told my reflection, trying to inject some confidence into my voice. "You are a strong, capable woman. You will nail this interview and start turning things around." The pep talk rang hollow even to my own ears. But fake it till you make it, right? I did my best to make myself look presentable, blow-drying my unruly hair into submission and applying a touch of makeup to hide the worst of the dark circles. The nicest outfit I'd managed to bring with me when I fled Portland was a simple black skirt and white blouse combo. Basic, but professional enough for a grocery store interview. By the time I finished getting ready, watery sunlight was starting to filter through the grimy windows. I found my mother in the kitchen, hunched over a mug of coffee with a cigarette dangling from her lips. "Morning," I mumbled as I poured myself a fresh cup. She grunted in response, not looking up from the newspaper spread out on the table in front of her. We'd settled into an uneasy routine over the past few weeks, dancing around each other like wary animals. Neither of us quite knew how to bridge the chasm of hurt and resentment that had grown between us over the years. I hesitated for a moment, then cleared my throat. "I've got that job interview this morning, at Bob's Grocery." My mother finally looked up, her roomy eyes assessing me. "You look nice," she said after a moment. "Good luck." "Thanks," I replied, surprised by the hint of warmth in her voice. An awkward silence fell between us. I shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, unsure what else to say. Finally, my mother stubbed out her cigarette and pushed herself to her feet with a groan. "Well, I'd better get ready for work. Late shift at the diner today." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to end the stilted interaction. "Right. Well, see you later then." As she shuffled off towards her bedroom, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Every conversation with my mother felt like navigating a minefield. One wrong step, and we'd be right back to screaming matches and slammed doors. Shaking off the tension, I gathered up my purse and car keys. Time to go charm the pants off Bob's Grocery and secure myself a thrilling career in produce management. The morning air was crisp and damp as I stepped outside, tendrils of mist still clinging to the overgrown grass. I inhaled deeply, savoring the earthy scent of decaying leaves and damp soil. Say what you will about Bridgeton, but you couldn't beat the fresh air. My good mood evaporated as soon as I laid eyes on my car. The piece of junk sedan I'd limped into town with was sitting forlornly in the gravel driveway, looking even more decrepit in the harsh light of day. I'd managed to get it running again after that nightmarish breakdown on the edge of town, but only barely. The check engine light still glowed accusingly, and the whole car rattled ominously anytime I went over 40 mph. But it was all I had, so it would have to do. I said a silent prayer to whatever automotive deity might be listening as I turned the key in the ignition. After a worrying moment of sputtering, the engine reluctantly grumbled to life. "That's my girl," I murmured, patting the dashboard. "Just get me through this interview in one piece." As I navigated the potholed streets of Bridgeton, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had plagued me since returning to my hometown. It wasn't just the bad memories or the shame of crawling back as a failure. There was something else, a nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. I'd tried to dismiss it as paranoia brought on by stress and lack of sleep, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. It was like the very air was thick with foreboding, as if the town itself was holding its breath in anticipation of some looming calamity. Get a grip, Janice, I chided myself. You're letting your imagination run wild again. There's nothing sinister going on here, just the same soul-crushing tedium and small-town drama as always. Still, I couldn't quite shake the shadow of unease as I pulled into the parking lot of Bob's Grocery. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the unsettling thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. Time to wow them with my extensive experience in stocking shelves. God, how had my life come to this? The fluorescent lights of Bob's Grocery assaulted my eyes as I stepped through the automatic doors, filling the store with a sickly greenish glow. The smell of floor cleaner and slightly wilted produce hung in the air. A bored-looking teenager was slouched behind the customer service desk, idly flipping through a magazine. He barely glanced up as I approached. "Hi, I'm here for an interview with the manager," I said, plastering on my most winning smile. "Janice Miller." The kid's dead-eyed stare made me wonder if I'd slipped into some kind of zombie movie without realizing it. After a long moment, he jerked his head towards a door marked "Employees Only." "Through there. Ask for Bob." "Thanks," I muttered, my fake smile slipping as I headed for the indicated door. The back area of the store was a maze of cardboard boxes and pallets stacked with inventory. I picked my way through the clutter, searching for any sign of the elusive Bob. I rounded a corner and nearly collided with a mountain of a man emerging from what looked like an office. He was easily 6'A" and built like a linebacker gone to seed, with meaty hands and a protruding belly straining the buttons of his polo shirt. "Watch where you're going," he barked, glowering down at me. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, taking an instinctive step back. "I'm looking for Bob. I have an interview." The man's scowl deepened. "You're looking at him. Janice Miller?" I nodded, trying to regain my composure. This was not off to a great start. Bob grunted and jerked his head towards the office. "In here." I trailed after him, my heart sinking. Something told me this interview was going to be about as pleasant as a root canal. 20 excruciating minutes later, I emerged from Bob's office feeling like I'd gone 10 rounds with a particularly surly gorilla. The interview, if you could even call it that, had consisted mainly of Bob grilling me on why someone with my background would possibly want to work at his little store. I'd done my best to spin it as wanting to get back to my roots and serve my community. In reality, I was desperate and running out of options, but something told me Bob wouldn't appreciate that level of honesty. By the end, I had no idea if I'd actually managed to convince him to hire me or not. He'd simply grunted that they'd be in touch and shooed me out of his office. As I made my way back through the store, my gaze was drawn to the wall of windows looking out onto the parking lot. A chill ran down my spine as I caught sight of a hulking shape lurking at the edge of the trees across the street. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the light, it had to be. But as I hurried to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I fumbled with my keys, half expecting to feel hot breath on the back of my neck at any moment. I practically dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. Get a grip, Janice. You're letting your imagination run wild again. There are no monsters lurking in the shadows, no werewolves waiting to pounce. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, I couldn't help but scan the tree line one last time. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness between the pines. I gunned the engine, my heart pounding as I sped away from Bob's grocery. It wasn't until I was safely back in my mother's trailer that I finally started to relax. This town was getting to me. The stress and lack of sleep were clearly taking their toll. I needed to pull myself together before I completely lost it. Little did I know, my nightmare was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a haze of futile job searching and increasingly disturbing nightmares. I'd wake up in a cold sweat every night, the snarls of the werewolves still echoing in my ears. The lack of sleep was starting to take its toll. Dark circles deepened under my eyes, and my nerves felt perpetually frayed. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, constantly looking over my shoulder for some unseen threat. My mother watched me with poorly concealed concern, but seemed at a loss for how to help. Our stilted attempts at conversation inevitably devolved into tense silence. The chasm between us felt wider than ever. It was on the fourth day after my disastrous interview at Bob's grocery that things took a turn for the truly bizarre. I was slouched on the couch, listlessly scrolling through job listings on my laptop, when a breaking news alert popped up. My blood ran cold as I read the headline. Brutal animal attack claims life of local man. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the article. A wave of nausea washed over me as I took in the grisly details. The mutilated body of 42-year-old Thomas Granger had been found in the woods on the outskirts of town. He'd apparently been out for an early morning jog when he was set upon by what authorities were calling an unusually large wolf or coyote. The article went on to describe the savage nature of the attack in stomach-churning detail. Granger's body had been torn apart, with huge chunks of flesh missing. The medical examiner was quoted as saying the wounds were inconsistent with any known predator in the area. My mind reeled as I tried to process what I was reading. It couldn't be. Werewolves weren't real. They were just figments of my overactive imagination, fueled by childhood trauma and too many horror movies. And yet the nagging sense of wrongness that had plagued me since returning to Bridgeton suddenly crystallized into cold certainty. Something evil was stalking these woods, something that wore the skin of a man by day and transformed into a ravenous beast by night. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short gasps. I had to get out of here. I had to warn someone. But who would believe me? As if in answer to my panicked thoughts, a sharp knock at the door made me nearly jump out of my skin. Heart pounding, I crept to the window and peeked out. A police cruiser was parked in the driveway, and a uniformed officer stood on the rickety porch steps. For a wild moment, I considered not answering. But that would only make me look guilty, of what I wasn't sure. But I knew how things worked in small towns like Bridgeton. Suspicion could turn ugly fast. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I opened the door. "Can I help you, officer?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. The cop regarded me with narrowed eyes. He was a bear of a man, easily topping 6.5 feet, with shoulders like a linebacker. The name tag on his chest read Hawkins. "Janice Miller?" he rumbled. I nodded, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "I'm going to need you to come down to the station and answer some questions." "Questions about what?" I asked, fighting to keep the tremor out of my voice. Hawkins' expression darkened. "About where you were between the hours of 5 and 7 a.m. this morning, and why your car was seen near the site where Thomas Granger's body was found." The bottom dropped out of my world. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of mistake. But as Hawkins none too gently guided me towards his waiting cruiser, I knew with sickening certainty that my nightmare was only just beginning. The drive to the Bridgeton police station passed in a blur. My mind raced, trying to piece together how I'd ended up in this impossible situation. I racked my brain, desperately trying to remember where I'd been that morning. But the days had started to bleed together in a haze of sleepless nights and aimless job searching. Had I gone for an early morning drive to clear my head? It was possible. I'd been having trouble sleeping, often finding myself restless and anxious in the pre-dawn hours. But surely I would remember if I'd been anywhere near the woods where that poor man had been killed. Wouldn't I? A chill ran down my spine as a disturbing thought occurred to me. What if I had been there, but couldn't remember? What if the nightmares that had plagued me weren't just dreams, but memories? No. I shook my head, trying to banish the insidious notion. That was crazy talk. I was letting my imagination run wild again. There had to be a rational explanation for all of this. Before I knew it, we were pulling into the small parking lot behind the police station. Officer Hawkins yanked open my door and practically dragged me inside, his meaty hand clamped around my upper arm like a vise. The station was little more than a double-wide trailer that had seen better days. A harried-looking receptionist barely glanced up from her computer as Hawkins marched me past the front desk and down a narrow hallway. He shoved me none too gently into a small interrogation room, the metal chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor as I stumbled into it. "Wait here," Hawkins growled. "Someone will be in to talk to you shortly." The door slammed shut behind him with an ominous finality. I was left alone in the claustrophobic room, my panic rising with each passing second. What felt like hours but was probably only about 20 minutes later, the door opened again. A man in a rumpled suit entered, carrying a thick manila folder. He was in his late 50s, with thinning gray hair and the paunchy build of someone who spent too much time behind a desk. But his eyes were sharp as they assessed me over the rim of his wire-framed glasses. "Miss Miller," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I'm Detective Reeves. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your whereabouts this morning." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I'm not sure I understand what's going on. Why am I here?" Reeves regarded me impassively. "You're here because your car was spotted near the scene of Thomas Granger's murder early this morning. Care to explain that?" "There must be some mistake," I said, hating how my voice shook. "I was home all night. I haven't been anywhere near the woods." "Are you sure about that?" Reeves asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Because we have an eyewitness who claims they saw a car matching the description of yours leaving the area around 6:30 a.m., just about the time the medical examiner estimates Granger was killed." My head spun. This couldn't be happening. I don't remember going anywhere. I've been having trouble sleeping lately. Maybe I went for a drive without realizing it. Even to my own ears, the excuse sounded pathetic. Reeves clearly wasn't buying it either. "Miss Miller, I'm going to be frank with you. You're in a lot of trouble here. We have physical evidence placing you at the scene of a brutal murder. Now you can keep playing dumb, or you can start telling me the truth. What really happened out there in those woods?" Tears pricked at my eyes as the full weight of my situation came crashing down on me. "I swear to you, I don't know anything about what happened to that man. Please, you have to believe me." Reeves leaned back in his chair, regarding me with a mixture of skepticism and something that might have been pity. "I want to believe you, Miss Miller. I really do. But the evidence says otherwise. So, unless you can give me a better explanation, I'm afraid I'm going to have to place you under arrest for the murder of Thomas Granger." The words hit me like a physical blow. This couldn't be real. Any moment now I would wake up from this nightmare. But as Reeves pulled out a pair of handcuffs, the cold metal closing around my wrists with a decisive click. I knew there would be no waking up from this horror. What happened next was a blur of Miranda Wright's fingerprinting and the harsh flash of a mugshot camera. Before I knew it, I found myself in a small holding cell, still reeling from the impossible turn my life had taken. As the heavy door clanged shut behind me, locking me in with my spiraling thoughts, one certainty crystallized in my mind. I had to find a way to prove my innocence. Because if I didn't, I had a sickening feeling that more bodies would turn up. And next time, I might not be able to claim I didn't remember what happened. The true killer, the monster from my nightmares, was still out there. And something told me it was just getting started. The holding cell was barely big enough for the narrow cot and rusted metal toilet crammed inside. The harsh fluorescent light cast everything in a sickly pallor, making the peeling paint on the walls look diseased. I huddled on the thin mattress, knees pulled up to my chest as I tried to make sense of the nightmare my life had become. How had things gone so horribly wrong so quickly? Just a few short weeks ago, I'd been living my dream life in Portland. Now here I was, locked in a jail cell and accused of a brutal murder I was certain I didn't commit. Or was I certain? A traitorous voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. What if the nightmares that had plagued me weren't just dreams? What if I really had blacked out and done something terrible without realizing it? No, I shook my head violently, trying to banish the insidious thoughts. I wasn't a killer. I couldn't be. But if I hadn't killed Thomas Granger, how had my car ended up at the crime scene? And why couldn't I remember where I'd been that morning? Round and round my thoughts spun, each scenario more outlandish than the last. By the time the cell door creaked open several hours later, I was half convinced I was losing my mind. Officer Hawkins filled the doorway, his bulk blocking out the harsh hallway light. "On your feet, Miller. Your lawyer's here." I blinked in confusion. My lawyer. But I didn't call anyone. Hawkins just grunted and gestured impatiently for me to follow him. In a daze, I stumbled after the hulking officer as he led me down the narrow hallway to a small conference room. A petite woman with close-cropped silver hair was waiting inside, her no-nonsense demeanor at odds with her diminutive stature. She fixed me with a piercing gaze as I sank into the chair across from her. "Miss Miller, I'm Gloria Ramirez. I've been appointed as your public defender." I nodded mutely, still trying to wrap my head around this latest development. Gloria wasted no time getting down to business. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence against you, and I won't lie, it doesn't look good. But I need you to tell me exactly what happened, in your own words. Don't leave anything out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." So I told her everything. About returning to Bridgeton after my life in Portland fell apart. About the increasingly vivid nightmares that had plagued me since coming back. And about my complete lack of memory regarding the morning Thomas Granger was killed. Gloria listened intently, her expression giving nothing away. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against her notepad. "Miss Miller, I have to ask, have you ever experienced blackouts or lost time before?" I shook my head. "Never. At least not that I can remember." Gloria's eyes narrowed slightly at that. "And you're certain you have no history of sleepwalking or any other sleep disorders?" "No, nothing like that," I insisted. "Look, I know how crazy this all sounds, but I swear to you, I didn't kill that man. I couldn't have." Gloria held up a hand to stop me. "I believe that you believe that, Miss Miller. But the fact remains that there is compelling evidence placing you at the scene of the crime. We need to focus on building a strong defense." She shuffled through some papers in front of her. Now, according to the police report, you were unemployed at the time of the murder. Is that correct? I nodded, a flush of shame creeping up my neck. Yes, I've been looking for work since I moved back, but... And you were living with your mother, correct? In the same trailer you grew up in? Another nod. Where was she going with this? Gloria's tone softened slightly. Miss Miller, I have to ask, is it possible that the stress of your current situation, combined with returning to a place with presumably difficult memories, could have triggered some kind of psychotic episode? I recoiled as if she'd slapped me. What? No, I'm not crazy. I'm not suggesting you are, Gloria said calmly. But given the circumstances, it's a possibility we need to consider. If we can show that you were not in your right mind at the time of the murder, it could significantly impact your case. My mind reeled. Was that really the best defense we had? Pleading insanity? Before I could formulate a response, a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. Raised voices, and the sound of running feet echoed through the thin walls. Gloria frowned and stood up. Wait here, she instructed, moving to the door. But before she could open it, the door burst inward with a bang. Officer Hawkins stumbled into the room, his face ashen. We've got another one, he gasped out. Another body. The blood drained from my face as the implications sank in. Another murder, while I was locked up in a cell. Gloria whirled on Hawkins, her eyes flashing. Where? When? Just found it. Out in the woods, not far from where Granger was killed. Hawkins' gaze fell on me, a mixture of confusion and suspicion in his eyes. But that's impossible. She's been here the whole time. A wild hope surged through me. Don't you see? This proves I'm innocent. I couldn't have killed that person. I've been locked up. Gloria held up a hand, her expression guarded. Let's not jump to conclusions. We need more information. She turned back to Hawkins. I want to see the crime scene, and I want Miss Miller released immediately, pending further investigation. Hawkins opened his mouth to argue, but Gloria cut him off. Unless you want a lawsuit for wrongful imprisonment on your hands, I suggest you comply. Now. The big cop's jaw clenched, but he nodded grudgingly. Fine. But she doesn't leave town, understood? Of course, Gloria agreed smoothly. She turned back to me, her expression stern. Miss Miller, I'm going to arrange for your release. Go home and stay there. Don't talk to anyone about the case. I'll be in touch soon with our next steps. My head was spinning as I was led through the process of being released. The adrenaline rush of potential vindication warred with a gnawing dread in the pit of my stomach. If I hadn't killed those people, then who or what had? The sun was setting by the time I stumbled out of the police station, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement of the parking lot. My mother was waiting in her ancient Buick, a cigarette dangling from her lips as she drummed her fingers nervously on the steering wheel. Oh, thank God, she muttered as I slid into the passenger seat. Are you all right? What the hell is going on, Janice? I shook my head, suddenly exhausted. I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. The drive home passed in tense silence. I could feel my mother's worried glances, but I kept my gaze fixed out the window, watching the familiar scenery of my hometown blur past. As we pulled into the driveway of the trailer, a chill ran down my spine. The woods loomed dark and forbidding at the edge of the overgrown yard. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a pair of gleaming eyes watching us from between the trees. I blinked, and they were gone. Just my imagination playing tricks on me again. It had to be. But as I followed my mother into the trailer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Something hungry. something that wore the skin of a human by day and transformed into a ravenous beast by night. And somehow I was caught in the middle of it all. That night, as I tossed and turned in my childhood bed, unable to sleep, a chilling thought occurred to me. What if the reason I couldn't remember where I'd been the morning of Thomas Granger's murder wasn't because I'd blacked out or lost time? What if it was because I'd been something else entirely? The full moon hung low and bloated in the sky outside my window, bathing the room in an eerie silver glow. As I stared at it, transfixed, I felt a strange tingling sensation begin to spread through my body. My last coherent thought before the pain hit was a desperate prayer, "Please God, don't let it be true." Then agony ripped through me, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It felt like my bones were melting, reshaping themselves beneath my skin. My muscles stretched and tore, reforming into new configurations. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a guttural howl. I thrashed on the bed, clawing at the sheets as my body contorted and changed. Coarse fur sprouted across my skin, my face elongated into a muzzle filled with razor-sharp teeth. The transformation seemed to last an eternity, though it was probably only a matter of minutes. When it was finally over, I lay panting on the shredded remains of my bed, my mind reeling as I tried to process what had just happened. Slowly I raised a hand, no, a paw, in front of my face. Wickedly curved claws extended from furry digits. I flexed them experimentally, marveling at the raw strength I could feel coursing through my new form. A whine escaped my throat as the full implications sank in. I was a werewolf. The nightmares hadn't just been dreams, they'd been memories. Memories of running through the woods on four legs, of the intoxicating scent of prey, of the taste of warm blood. Oh God, I really had killed Thomas Granger. And who knew how many others over the years? Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I had to get out of here, had to run far away before I hurt anyone else. I lunged for the window, my powerful new muscles easily smashing through the flimsy glass. I landed on all fours in the overgrown yard, my keen senses immediately overwhelmed by the riot of scents and sounds of the night. The forest called to me, dark and inviting. Every instinct screamed at me to lose myself in its depths, to give in to the primal hunger gnawing at my belly. But a small part of my human mind still clung to reason. I couldn't run. That would only make me look guilty. And there was still another killer out there, the one responsible for the most recent murder. I had to find them, had to stop them before anyone else died. It was the only way to prove my innocence, and maybe find some redemption for the blood already on my hands. With a low growl, I turned away from the temptation of the forest and loped towards town. The hunt was on. The streets of Bridgeton were deserted at this late hour, the few streetlights casting pools of sickly yellow illumination at widely spaced intervals. My padded feet made no sound on the cracked asphalt as I slunk from shadow to shadow, following my nose. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for, but some primal instinct told me I would know it when I found it. Another werewolf, perhaps. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. How many of us were there? As I neared the center of town, a familiar scent caught my attention. Blood. Fresh blood, and lots of it. I followed the trail to a narrow alley behind the local bar. The coppery tang grew stronger with each step, making my mouth water despite myself. I rounded a dumpster and froze, a low growl rumbling in my chest at the sight before me. A man's body lay crumpled on the grimy pavement, limbs splayed at unnatural angles. His throat had been torn out, and great chunks were missing from his torso. It looked as though something had been feeding on him. But it was the figure crouched over the corpse that held my attention. In the dim light, I could just make out the hulking shape of another werewolf. It was massive, easily twice my size, with matted gray fur and gleaming yellow eyes. Those eyes locked onto me, and a snarl curled back lips to reveal blood-stained fangs. I had found my quarry, but now I was the prey. The larger werewolf lunged at me with frightening speed. I barely managed to dodge, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle my fur. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I was no match for this monster in size or strength, but I was smaller, faster, and I had something to fight for. I darted in, raking my claws across its flank before dancing away. The bigger wolf roared in pain and fury, snapping at me with jaws that could easily crush bone. We circled each other, feinting and slashing in a deadly dance. Blood matted both our coats, but I couldn't tell how much was mine and how much was my opponent's. I was tiring quickly, unused to this new body and the demands of combat. The other werewolf seemed to sense my flagging strength. It pressed its advantage, driving me back step by step. My heel caught on something, a loose piece of trash maybe, and I stumbled. In that moment of vulnerability, the monster was on me. Massive jaws closed around my throat as we crashed to the ground. I thrashed desperately, clawing at any part of my attacker I could reach, but its grip was like iron, slowly choking the life from me. Its spots danced before my eyes as my lungs screamed for air. This was it. I was going to die here, in this filthy alley, my innocence never proven. Just as darkness began to close in, a deafening bang echoed off the brick walls. The pressure on my throat suddenly released as the other werewolf jerked back with a pained yelp. I gasped for breath, my vision slowly clearing. Through the haze, I saw a figure silhouetted at the mouth of the alley, a shotgun raised to their shoulder. "Get away from her, you son of a bitch," a familiar voice growled. "Mom?" I blinked in disbelief, struggling to process what I was seeing. There, backlit by a street lamp, stood my mother. Her hair was wild, her nightgown fluttering in the breeze, but her stance was rock-steady as she aimed the shotgun at the larger werewolf. The monster snarled, tensing to spring at this new threat. But before it could move, another thunderous report split the night. The werewolf staggered, howling in pain as buckshot tore into its shoulder. I said, "Get away." My mother roared, pumping the shotgun for another round. The beast seemed to reconsider its options. With a final hate-filled glare in my direction, it turned and bounded away, quickly disappearing into the shadows. For a long moment, the alley was silent save for my ragged breathing and the faint ringing in my ears from the gunshots. Then my mother lowered the shotgun, her hands shaking slightly. "Janice," she called softly, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Is that you?" I whined softly in response, unsure how to communicate in this form. Slowly, carefully, I pulled myself to my feet and took a hesitant step towards her. My mother's eyes widened, but to her credit, she didn't flinch away. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed. "What have they done to you?" Before I could react, she had crossed the distance between us and thrown her arms around my furred neck. I stiffened in surprise, then melted into the embrace, burying my muzzle in her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, stroking my head. "I should have told you years ago. Should have prepared you for this." I pulled back, cocking my head in confusion. What was she talking about? My mother sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 60-plus years. "We need to get you home. I'll explain everything there. Can you walk?" I nodded, wincing at the various aches and pains making themselves known now that the adrenaline was fading. But I could manage. As we made our way back to the trailer, keeping to back alleys and shadows, my mind raced. How had my mother known where to find me? How was she so calm about all of this? And what did she mean? She should have told me years ago. By the time we reached home, the sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. As we stepped inside, I felt the now familiar tingling sensation wash over me. In moments I was human again, naked and shivering on the living room floor. My mother wordlessly handed me a robe, then busied herself making coffee while I got dressed. When I emerged from my room, she was waiting at the kitchen table, 2 steaming mugs in front of her. "Sit down, Janice," she said quietly. "We have a lot to talk about." I sank into the chair across from her, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Mom, what's going on? How did you know?" She held up a hand to stop me. "Let me start at the beginning. It's a long story, and not an easy one to tell." My mother took a deep breath, her eyes far away. "It started with your father. He was like you, a werewolf." I gasped, nearly choking on my coffee. "Dad, but how?" "It runs in his family," she explained. "As for generations, they learned to control it, to hide what they were from the rest of the world. Your father thought he could keep it from you too. Thought if he was careful enough, the curse wouldn't be passed down." She laughed bitterly. "Fat lot of good that did. All those camping trips, those nights he'd disappear, he was running with his pack. Hunting." My stomach churned as I remembered the camping trip photo I'd seen just days ago. Had my father been a monster even then? "When you were born," my mother continued, "we hoped you'd been spared. You showed no signs of the change as a child, but then puberty hit and the nightmares started." I shook my head, struggling to take it all in. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I thought I was going crazy." "I wanted to," she said, her voice cracking. "God, I wanted to. But your father made me promise. He was convinced that if you didn't know, it would somehow protect you. That ignorance would keep the beast at bay." Hunger flared in my chest. "Well, that worked out great, didn't it? I've been changing for who knows how long, killing people, and I didn't even know it." My mother flinched at my harsh tone. "I'm so sorry, Janice. I should have told you everything when your father died. I was scared. Scared of losing you too." I wanted to stay angry, to lash out at her for keeping this secret. But the pain and regret in her eyes doused the flames of my rage. She had been trying to protect me in her own misguided way. "So what do we do now?" I asked, suddenly feeling very small and lost. My mother reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Now we figure out how to control this thing. And we find the bastard who's been framing you for these murders." I blinked in surprise. "You believe I'm innocent?" She nodded firmly. "I know my daughter. Whatever that thing inside you is capable of, you're not a cold-blooded killer." For the first time in what felt like forever, a spark of hope kindled in my chest. I wasn't alone in this anymore. "Okay," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Where do we start?" My mother's eyes gleamed with determination. "First, we need to talk to someone who knows more about all this than I do. It's time you met the rest of your father's family." As the sun rose over Bridgeton, casting long shadows across the kitchen, I realized my life would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to make things right. The hunt for the truth, and for the real killer, was about to begin. The drive to my father's family home was tense and quiet. We wound our way up into the hills outside of Bridgeton, the paved road eventually giving way to a rutted dirt track that snaked through dense forest. My mother's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her jaw set in a grim line. I could tell she was dreading this reunion almost as much as I was. So I ventured, breaking the silence, "How much do you actually know about Dad's family? About what they are?" She sighed, keeping her eyes on the treacherous road. Not as much as I should. Your father was always very secretive about them. Said it was for our own protection. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. I was young and in love. I believed him when he said he'd left that life behind. Believed we could have a normal family. I digested this in silence for a moment. But you knew what he was. What I might become. How could you just ignore it all these years? I didn't ignore it, she snapped, then took a deep breath. I'm sorry. It wasn't that simple. I loved your father despite what he was, and I love you. I thought if I could just keep you away from that world, maybe. She trailed off, shaking her head. It doesn't matter now. We're here. The car rounded a bend, and suddenly a sprawling log cabin came into view. It was an impressive structure, all rough-hewn timber and gleaming windows. A wraparound porch circled the entire building, dotted with rocking chairs and potted plants. It looked like something out of a rustic vacation brochure. Hard to believe it was home to a pack of werewolves. As we pulled up the gravel driveway, the front door swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair stepped out onto the porch. Even at a distance, I could see the family resemblance. He had the same strong jaw and piercing blue eyes as my father. That's your Uncle Robert, my mother murmured as we got out of the car. Your father's older brother. Robert descended the porch steps, his expression unreadable as he approached us. Margaret, he said, nodding to my mother. It's been a long time. Not long enough, she replied coolly. His gaze shifted to me, and I fought the urge to shrink back. There was something predatory in those eyes, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And you must be Janice, he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My, how you've grown. Last time I saw you, you were just a pup. I bristled at the terminology, but before I could retort, my mother cut in. We're not here for a family reunion, Robert. Janice needs help. She started changing, and there's been incidents. Robert's eyebrows rose. Incidents? Do tell. Haltingly, with frequent interjections from my mother, I recounted the events of the past few weeks. The nightmares, the blackouts, the murders I was accused of committing. As I spoke, Robert's expression grew increasingly grave. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, stroking his chin thoughtfully. Well, he said finally, it seems we have quite a situation on our hands. Come inside. We have much to discuss. He turned and strode back towards the house. After exchanging a wary glance with my mother, I followed. The interior of the cabin was just as impressive as the outside, all polished wood and plush furnishings. But I barely had time to take it in before we were ushered into a cozy study lined with bookshelves. Robert settled behind a massive oak desk, gesturing for us to take seats opposite him. Now then, he said, steepling his fingers, let's start at the beginning. What do you know about your condition, Janice? I shrugged helplessly. Not much, just what I've experienced myself, and the little bit Mom's told me. I know it runs in the family, that Dad was like me, but beyond that. He nodded, as if this was exactly what he'd expected. Your father was a fool, he said bluntly. He thought he could run from his nature, could somehow spare you from your heritage. But the wolf always finds a way out. So what exactly is this heritage? I asked, leaning forward. How does it work, and how do I control it? Robert's eyes gleamed with something like approval. Good questions. The simple answer is, we are lycanthropes, werewolves in the common parlance. We carry a genetic mutation that allows us to shift between human and wolf form. He paused, letting that sink in. The more complex answer is that we are guardians, protectors of the balance between the human world and the supernatural realm that exists alongside it. I blinked, trying to process this. Supernatural realm? You mean there are other things out there, besides werewolves? A wry smile twisted Robert's lips. Oh yes, many things. Some benign, some less so. It is our duty to keep them in check, to prevent them from preying on humanity. My head was spinning. This was so much more than I'd bargained for. And the murders? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Did I? No, Robert said firmly. While it's true that newly turned wolves can be unstable, I don't believe you're responsible for these killings. The method is all wrong. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by confusion. What do you mean, the method is wrong? Robert's expression darkened. The victims were torn apart, yes, eviscerated, with large chunks of flesh missing? I nodded, fighting back a wave of nausea at the memory. That's not how we hunt, he explained. A werewolf kill is quick, clean. We go for the throat, sever the carotid artery. These murders were messy, prolonged. Whatever did this was toying with its prey. A chill ran down my spine. If not a werewolf, then what? Robert exchanged a significant look with my mother. That, he said gravely, is what we need to find out, and quickly. Because whatever this creature is, it's using the presence of a new wolf in town to cover its tracks. And I fear it's only getting started. As the implications of his words sank in, I realized that my problems were far bigger than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. Something evil was stalking the streets of Bridgeton, and somehow I was the key to stopping it. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of information and training. Uncle Robert and the rest of my father's family, my family I supposed, took it upon themselves to educate me in the ways of the werewolf. I learned about the phases of the moon and how they affected our transformations, about the heightened senses and strength that came with our curse, or gift, as Uncle Robert insisted on calling it, about the complex hierarchy of the pack and the responsibilities that came with being part of it. But most importantly, I learned control. Through grueling physical exercises and intense meditation sessions, I slowly began to master the beast within. By the end of the week, I could shift at will, no longer at the mercy of the full moon or my own turbulent emotions. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, of fear, of rage so intense I thought I might lose myself to it entirely. But each time I came close to giving in, I remembered the bodies, the innocent lives lost, the threat still lurking in the shadows of Bridgeton. That kept me focused, kept me human, even as I embraced the wolf. On the seventh day, as the sun was setting behind the mountains, Uncle Robert called me into his study. My mother was already there, along with a few other members of the pack I'd come to know over the past week. "You've made remarkable progress, Janice," Robert said, a note of pride in his voice. "You've taken to this life far more quickly than most. Your father would be proud." I wasn't sure how to feel about that, but I nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you. But I'm guessing you didn't call me here just to compliment me." A grim smile flickered across Robert's face. "Perceptive. You're right, of course. We've received word from our contacts in town. There's been another killing." My blood ran cold. "When? Where?" "Last night. On the outskirts of town near the old Miller property." He paused, his eyes boring into mine. It was one of ours this time. A young wolf, barely turned. A collective growl rumbled through the room. I felt it building in my own chest, a mixture of grief and rage I'd never experienced before. "Do we know anything more about what we're dealing with?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Robert nodded, his expression grim. "Our suspicions have been confirmed. This is no ordinary predator. We're dealing with a skinwalker." The term was unfamiliar to me, but the reactions of the others in the room told me it was bad news. Very bad news. "What exactly is a skinwalker?" I asked, dreading the answer. "A type of shapeshifter," Robert explained. "But unlike us, they're not bound to a single alternate form. They can take on the appearance of any animal or person they choose." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They're also practitioners of powerful dark magic, and they feed on fear as much as flesh." The implications hit me like a punch to the gut. So this thing could be anyone in town. It could be walking around in human form, and we'd never know. Robert nodded gravely. "Exactly. Which is why we need to act quickly. Skinwalkers are nearly impossible to track in human form, but they can't maintain the disguise indefinitely. Eventually they need to hunt in their true form." "So what's the plan?" I asked, a determined edge creeping into my voice. "We hunt it," Robert said simply. "We flood the town with our pack, watch for any signs of suspicious activity, and when it reveals itself..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The predatory gleam in everyone's eyes said it all. "When do we start?" I asked, already feeling the familiar tingle of the change starting to come over me. Robert's smile was fierce and proud. "Tonight. It's time to show this monster what happens when it threatens our territory." As we filed out of the study to prepare for the hunt, my mother caught my arm. Her eyes were filled with worry, but there was a steely resolve there too. "Be careful out there," she said softly. "I can't lose you too." I pulled her into a tight hug. "I will be. And Mom, thank you. For everything." She nodded, blinking back tears. "Go get that son of a bitch." With a final squeeze of her hand, I turned and followed the others out into the gathering darkness. The hunt was on, and I was ready. As we melted into the shadows of the forest, I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't running from the monster. I was becoming one. And God help anyone, or anything, that got in my way. The pack moved through the outskirts of Bridgeton like ghosts, our padded feet making no sound on the damp earth. The night air was thick with the scents of the forest and the distant town, but we were all alert for anything out of the ordinary. I stuck close to Uncle Robert, still not entirely confident in my newfound abilities. My senses were on overdrive, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs amplified tenfold. The wolf part of me reveled in the sensory overload, but the human part was struggling to process it all. We'd split into smaller groups to cover more ground, communicating through a series of low howls and barks that somehow made perfect sense to my wolf brain. The plan was to sweep the areas where the killings had taken place, looking for any sign of the skinwalker. As we neared the edge of town, a familiar scent caught my attention. Blood. Fresh blood. I let out a low whine, alerting the others. Uncle Robert's massive gray form padded up beside me, his nose twitching as he caught the scent too. With a series of quick gestures, he directed the pack to spread out and approach cautiously. I fell in line, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. We crept through the underbrush, the scent of blood growing stronger with each step. As we emerged into a small clearing, the source became horrifyingly clear. A body lay sprawled in the center of the clearing, limbs splayed at unnatural angles. Even from a distance, I could see that large chunks of flesh had been torn away, the ground around the corpse dark and sticky with blood. But it was the figure crouched over the body that held our attention. At first glance, it looked almost human, But there was something fundamentally wrong about its proportions. Its limbs were too long, too jointed. And its face. As it raised its head to look at us, I had to bite back a whimper of terror. The face was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features, with elongated jaws filled with needle-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed with an unholy light. The Skinwalker. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a sound that was half snarl, half scream, the creature launched itself at us. What followed was a blur of fur, fangs, and blood. The pack surged forward as one, meeting the Skinwalker's charge head-on. But despite being outnumbered, the monster was incredibly strong and fast. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, its form seeming to shift and change even as it fought. One moment it had the powerful haunches of a wolf, the next the raking claws of a bear. It was like fighting a living nightmare. I hung back initially, overwhelmed by the ferocity of the battle. But as I saw pack members being thrown aside, heard their yelps of pain, something snapped inside me. With a roar that surprised even myself, I leapt into the fray. My claws found purchase in the Skinwalker's flank, drawing a screech of pain from the creature. It whirled to face me, its grotesque features twisting in fury. Time seemed to slow as we faced each other. In its eyes, I saw a hunger that went beyond mere physical need. This thing fed on fear, on pain, on the very essence of its victims. And it wanted me. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. Angry at this monster for the lives it had taken. Angry at the fear it had instilled in my town. Angry at the way it had upended my life. I let that anger fuel me, felt it merge with the power of the wolf, and I attacked. Our battle was vicious and primal. We rolled across the forest floor, a tangle of snapping jaws and slashing claws. I felt its teeth sink into my shoulder, felt my own fangs tear into its flesh. The taste of its blood was foul in my mouth, like rotting meat and decay. I was dimly aware of the rest of the pack circling us, looking for an opening to help. But this fight had become personal. It was between me and the monster that had framed me, that had turned my homecoming into a nightmare. As we grappled, I felt the Skinwalker's strength beginning to flag. Its movements became less fluid, more desperate. It had underestimated me, underestimated the power of a newly turned wolf fighting for her life and her home. With a final surge of strength, I pinned the creature to the ground, my jaws clamped around its throat. It thrashed and clawed at me, but I held on, tasting its foul blood and feeling its life ebbing away. Just before the light faded from its eyes, the Skinwalker's form seemed to shimmer and change one last time, and I found myself staring into a face I recognized. Bob, the manager of the grocery store where I'd interviewed. The man who had looked at me with such suspicion and disdain. As realization dawned, the creature let out a final, gurgling laugh. Then it went limp beneath me, its body already beginning to dissolve into a foul-smelling ichor. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. It had been here all along, hiding in plain sight. How many other secrets was this town hiding? As the rest of the pack gathered around me, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and concern, I knew that my journey was far from over. I had embraced my heritage and defeated a monster, yes. But in doing so, I had opened the door to a world far stranger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Bridgeton would never be the same, and neither would I. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The warm summer air was heavy with the scent of pine and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the chill that had permeated Bridgeton on that fateful night a year ago. So much had changed since then. The defeat of the Skinwalker had marked a turning point, not just for me, but for the entire town. With Bob's true nature revealed, many of Bridgeton's long-buried secrets had come to light. It turned out he wasn't the only supernatural creature that had been hiding in our midst. The ensuing months had been a whirlwind of revelations, confrontations, and ultimately reconciliation. My mother and I had worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the human residents of Bridgeton and the supernatural community that had always existed alongside them. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought the whole town might tear itself apart. But slowly, painfully, we had forged a new kind of understanding. Bridgeton had become a haven of sorts, a place where humans and supernatural beings could coexist openly. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As for me, I had fully embraced my role as a protector. Uncle Robert had been right, it wasn't a curse, but a responsibility. A gift even. I now led my own small pack, patrolling the forests around Bridgeton and keeping an eye out for any threats, supernatural or otherwise. The door creaked open behind me, and I turned to see my mother step out onto the porch. She looked years younger than she had when I first returned to Bridgeton, the weight of secrets no longer dragging her down. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. I smiled, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic, just reflecting. It's been quite a year, hasn't it? She nodded, her eyes distant. Your father would be proud of you, you know, of what you've accomplished here. The mention of my father no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Time and understanding had softened those edges. I hope so, I said softly. I think he'd be proud of both of us. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In the distance I could hear the faint howls of my pack, calling me to join them for the evening run. Go on, my mother said, a knowing smile on her face. They're waiting for you. I set down my mug and pulled her into a tight hug. I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything. I love you too, sweetheart. Now go. Run free. With a final squeeze, I stepped off the porch. The familiar tingle of the change washed over me, and in moments I was racing through the underbrush on 4 paws, my pack falling in around me. As we ran beneath the rising moon, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. I had found my place in the world, bridging the gap between human and wolf, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Bridgeton was my home, my territory, and I would protect it and all who dwelled here until my dying breath. The girl who had fled this town in fear and shame was gone. In her place stood, or rather ran, a woman who had embraced her true nature. A guardian, a leader, a werewolf. And for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely free. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'd love to hear what you thought about this story, so drop your impressions in the comments below. If you enjoyed it and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means a lot. Catch you in the next one.